But let me start out today by trying to create a small. I have a console app already. I've kind of cheated a little bit. I went in and I found in the videos again we have this link right here. So in the videos I should have some comments. Let me just zoom out a little bit. There we go. I have some comments, and here I have this link again that I showed you yesterday that has all the old code from 2000, and this is actually code from 2017, and that was pretty much where .NET Core really started taking traction, but it still works. So I'm going to grab this console app right here. That's the one I kind of downloaded today, and I'm going to try and split that up into smaller pieces with multiple packages, and then I'm going to try and actually right now when you print stuff, whenever I want to do something in my menu right now, it pretty much just says list all customers. It doesn't actually get any customers and list them for real. So that's what I'm going to do with a few of these examples right here. And I'm going to take two of them, which are, in my mind, the toughest one is the add, because you have to get used to doing a more read line and stuff like that. And then the other one is just going to be the read, because then I'm kind of forced into actually creating some kind of database and data layer in my application. So let's try that out. I'm jumping into code now, and I am in Visual Studio, but it is the Mac version. So if this is completely madness, I will have to switch to Windows later. It is in the tutorials. I've made a few videos for that using Windows instead of Mac. So you can go and check that out if you need it. What do I have right now? Well, let's just get rid of this guy. Right now I have a solution. The solution is again just a copy that I just took right here. It's this copy right here. I downloaded that entire solution. If you go to C# Basic, you just copy the entire code, clone it. That's what I've done. And then I deleted these 6 application parts right here, which are also packages, and just kept this final one. That's all I did. So if you guys kind of are stuck right now, that's a starting point today. Then you get a console app that has a basic menu. Let's try and jump back to the code. Here's the console app. And again, I removed all the other parts and I only have this console app right here left. And in this one, there's a program. Program is very, very simple. All it does is pretty much just start a printer. That's all it does. And then in the end, it says read line. And that was again from the old bug where it didn't actually keep the window open, but that's running now, so it doesn't need to be there. What does the printer do? Well, the printer that starts everything for me. It creates a couple of fake customers right now. We're going to move that now. I'm going to remove that from within the printer and move that responsibility to a service. And then it pretty much starts the while loop that you guys have already built probably for your menus. And then it starts listing different selections. In my case, this is from the video. And in my case, I have a few things right here that's not perfect. I don't clear the menu ever. I write the menu right after when I do a selection. I show the selection and write the menu right after. I'm going to make a change so that doesn't happen. And the rest of it is pretty basic stuff that you already played around with. We are going to have to make some helper classes, methods as well probably. So we'll look into that as well. But let's start very simple. Let's start with just moving these two things into a model, right? You guys are used to in Java. Last semester, you probably made a package called models, or at least a folder for all the model object or entities. So let's try and do that. I will right-click my solution. I will add a new project. You can do exactly the same on Windows. Right-click solution, add project. And then this UI looks a little bit different on Windows. But the idea is pretty much to try and see if we can find this library one. And here's something called a class library. And you have almost the same setup. You just have to find class library in Windows. It shouldn't be that different. I say next. And notice it's important that you select .NET Core class library. There's also .NET Standard library. And it's also important that you select C# because there's actually also Visual Basic in Windows. Also F# actually, which is a completely different language. So C# and .NET Core class library. I say next. Maybe. There we go. And then in Windows, it's on the same page, but you have to select a target framework, and that target framework should be the same that the entire group is using. So you'll notice I have different frameworks right here. At the current time, my setup is 3.1, but they will release 3.2 probably during our during this semester. So you have to select the same .NET Core 3.1. If you start there, that's what you need to select for everything for this entire semester. I'll say next. I'll give it a name, and this is going to be my models. So let's just call it menu 2020 uppercase and .models. Now there are some naming conventions right here. You can go and check them out yourselves. But I'm just going to be lazy right now. This is the naming convention I'm used to in most of the software I'm building right now. So I'm going to try and use that and see what happens. Now the dot here might be a problem. So let's put in underscore or just keep the uppercase. So just beware, my point is just beware of what you put into your solutions. Also not spaces, try to avoid them. Try to keep something simple. Numbers, again, probably not something we should do, but I'm going to keep it here for this example. So now I have a new project right here, and this project can run. I cannot do run for this specific project right here, and you can't do that with Windows either, because this is not an exe file. This is actually a DLL file in the end. So it's just code. It's not an executable. It's just code that an executable can use, right? So I'll keep that, and I'll delete this basic class it builds for me, and I'll just move these to address and customer. I want to move that to the models because that's where it belongs now. And then some IDEs actually help you out here, so that when I go into address, for instance, you'll notice it actually kept the old namespace. So that's an important point as well. This is not what I want. I don't want this namespace to reference where it belonged to before. I want it to reference now that it's actually under this project. So I'll just rename this to menu 2020 models like this. I'll make that namespace also for the customer. There we go. So now I have explained to the system that these two now belong in a new package. They belong in the menu models package and not in the console app package. So I moved it away. Sweet. Next step. Right now my program will start failing because it says I cannot find the customer or the address. It's not within my package or my namespace anymore. It's somewhere else. Now I cannot import it if I want to yet, because if I try to import right now, it doesn't know where the package resides. So I can only generate a new class, and that's not what I want. So I need to explain now to the console app that all of a sudden this exe file, the console app, has a dependency to another file, right? Or another package. And the package it needs to have a dependency to is this guy. So again, let's just go into options. I just want to see if I can show you. Give me a second, because I want to see if I can, yeah. So here you can see that right now, this is just a library, but I could actually switch to an executable instead if I wanted to, right? So you can actually change projects if you want to later on, but right now it's just a library again. So I cannot run it as an executable, but I need to know that it exists. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to dependencies, and I'm going to add a reference. And then I need to go to my projects, and here I should have my new project available right here, and I'll say okay. So now it knows that there's a dependency from this project to this project. And then I should actually be able to import this guy now, hopefully. And I actually think I know why I can't make the reference. And that's actually exactly what I just talked about earlier. Here's a problem with version. Because I just forgot while I downloaded this old project, I forgot that, of course, the old project doesn't have .NET Core. So let's try and see what we actually have right here. If I go into my project, I go to options, and I go to build. So notice this is a .NET Core project 2.1. So it's an old version. And that's where I'm saying you have to be aware of compatibility. So that means that this console app does not understand how to read a .NET Core version 3.1, which is now my new library right here. So let's try and upgrade it to a new version and see if it can do that. So again, all I pretty much did was just go into options, or I think it's called properties inside Windows. And I just try to change the target framework so that it can build to another framework. Let's try and see if it understands now and can reference the other project now. There we go. So now the project is actually available because we have the same versions. So what we're talking about right here is actually, think of it this way. You have different versions of building your software. And the one I downloaded, the console application right here from 2017, was actually in the old version 2.1. And that doesn't understand how to read binary files or DLL files in version 3.1, right? That makes sense. It can't read future packages. So what I'm doing is I'm updating this version to 3.1 as well. So now they both have the same version and they can start communicating. Now you're going to face this when we see new versions popping out during the semester. So it's important that you guys have seen that. And again, what did I do? I went into my project, I went into options, and I found the current version by going into build, and then I changed the version. I upped the version to 3.1. And in this case, it worked perfectly, but sometimes you might get some incompatibility, like maybe they made some changes to the way you write your code, and then you have to rewrite the code to get up to a new version. But normally you're lucky and everything will just work out of the box. And if you guys build a completely blank console app, or you use the one we built yesterday, you're probably already at the right version, so it shouldn't be a problem. So now that I made the import, maybe I can actually go and get this guy into the system. Let's just make sure I made the reference. Click. I'll say OK. So now that I have a reference to a project that is actually valid, I should be able to import it. Boink. I'll call the using keyword right here. And again, I'm just referencing to the name that I put right here in the namespace. So it's really not magic in any way. I'm just putting in the using keyword and then the name of the namespace in this project down here. But notice that is not possible to do unless I have a dependency and I have the correct version. Okay, so that's two things you need to know. I have a dependency for the project. So again, if I open this guy and I show references, you'll see here's the dependency for the project. And also I have the correct version in both projects. Okay, sweet. So now we moved kind of these guys, and it seems that my application is still running. So let's just try and run it to see that everything works as expected. Let's try and press 1, enter. Now notice it actually says list all customers and then prints the menu right away. If we don't want that, we could put in some kind of read line. So let's try and jump into the printer. And here's where we kind of show the menu. We add the while loop. We start asking questions, what we want to do. And then before we show the menu again, we could add a console write line right here saying press enter to continue, something like that. And then do a read line right here to kind of break the application and stop it until you press that enter key. Let's just try and rerun this. So, oh man, I can't see from my own face down here. There we go. It's the truth. Sounds weird, but it's the truth. I'll press 2, I'll press enter, and you'll see add customer. That was the one I just called. And then when I press enter, you'll see now the menu pops up again. And then you could start clearing the menu and do stuff like that if you want to. But it was just to give you guys, it's pretty easy to kind of get a break in there, to press enter, to continue, and then it feels more like a real application. Okay, so again, notice the goal for yesterday was pretty much just, it shouldn't do anything. It just prints the command you executed. So it's not doing anything behind the scenes. It's just printing stuff. So that will be the next step. That will be to actually, instead of console writing, then I should actually start to print some customers instead of actually just console writing stuff. So let's start with step one. Why not create a layer for adding data like you're used to? You had like the business logic layer for handling logic, and then you had a data access layer or data logic layer, whatever you call it. Let's just call it data access layer because that's the one I'm used to. And I think that's the same you're using. And now since I use the class library, it has a shortcut up here so I can use it right away. I want to use .NET Core 3.1 again because I just changed my console app to that. Perfect. I'll make the project right here and I'll call it data access layer. Let's call it menu 2020 like I just used, and then data access layer. I'll say create. What I'm doing right here is I keep moving responsibility around right now. Instead of just starting to write directly in my console app, I consider where does the functionality of maintaining data belong, and that belongs in a data access layer of some kind. Let's just delete this guy. That was the class you get default. I just deleted it because I want to make my own class. I'll make a new class right here, and it's going to be called, I'm going to try and just have a table mindset in this data access layer right here. So I'm going to make a table for each entity I have. So let's start out with a customer table. And to be honest, this is really up to you how you want to do this. There's a lot of ways you could handle this. And I'm going to show you some ways of doing this with the entity framework so we can make it really easy to customize and reuse. But today it's just going to be basic stuff. So my customer table is going to contain a list of customers. Whoops. And notice right away, I have two issues right here. One, I don't know what a list is. So I have to, again, use a package Microsoft built called System Collection Generic. And I don't know what a customer is. And I have the same problem like before, because I need to have a dependency. So I'll add a dependency, add a reference. I'll say I need access to models like this. And hopefully now it knows about customers. So now I should be able to call the using keyword. I don't think it got that dependency. Add reference. There we go. Did it get it? Let's try and rebuild everything. It's because it's running. I think it doesn't allow me to make these dependencies and do the build properly. Let's just try and do it. Oh, I can see why. I'm using the freaking wrong dependency folder. It should be down here, of course, I make a dependency. So I need to, of course, select the right project and add the dependency there. And there's the models. So that makes perfect sense. I'll say, okay. And now I have the dependency available for the models. And now I should be able to do the import. And it should be Alt-Enter on the Windows machine to kind of get that import list shown. I'll just call this customers. And I'll just make it into a new list right away. And again, we can also do that in the constructor. We can start talking about good and bad practice here. But again, it's not really important for me right now because I'm going to make this a static class with the setup we have right now. So now we have that available, this customer. Another thing normal table needs is an ID. So I'll make an int ID right here. And I'm just considering if I should be completely lazy right here. Yeah, I'm going to be a lazy boy today. And I'm going to just make those of public, both of them. Public, public. So now the table has these guys available from the outside. And then we're going to talk about interfaces later and making this a bit more powerful with interfaces. So now we have these guys available. And we actually have a customer table that can contain data. And I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to make both of them static. Now, making these static is a thing I have to do to kind of have only one reference of these guys in memory. So it doesn't matter if I make 10 tables. I could also make the table static if I wanted to. So it doesn't matter now how many I make of these different tables. It will actually keep one in memory and reference to that one. That is important because I want to work with the customers, right? I want that to be only one customer table in my entire system, no matter how many times I actually create this table. So now I should have a customer table that I can use to add data and remove data. And again, notice this, the idea with the data access layer is only persistence of data. The idea is only to store data and retrieve data from some kind of hard disk, or right now it's in memory, but it could be an SQL database. The idea is only persistence of data. What else do we need? Well, the final thing I want is some kind of service layer. That's what we call the business logic layer. It's going to have a different name this semester, but it's kind of the same idea what we're looking for. I'm just going to today to call it business logic layer. So it's going to be menu 2020 business logic layer. I think that was the name you used last semester, so let's just keep that for now. I'll create this new project as well. Get rid of the class that it built by default. And I will add a dependency right away. And the business logic layer needs two references. The business logic layer needs a reference in the way that we are used to building tree-layered architecture. It'll need a reference to the data access layer, and it'll need a reference to the models, right? That's kind of the thing that we have in the tree-layered architecture. We have the UI knowing about the business logic layer, that knows about the data access layer, and they all know about the models. Let's try and say okay. And then we can try and create our first service right here. I'll make a new class, and I won't use interfaces or anything today. I'll just make a very simple customer service. Create that new class. There we go. What the? That was a mono crash. Go away. So now we have the customer service available. Now the customer service needs access to the customer table. So if we didn't want to use static classes, we would have to consider how can we add a customer table to the customer service. But since I made everything static right now, it shouldn't really be an issue. So let's just keep it on its own for now. Let's start with a simple one. Let's start with a read all customers. It should be a public method. It should return a list of customers. Let's import those. Import that one. And it should be called get customers. So what should it do? Well, it should return, and then we want to access the customer table. Let's see if we can get some help here. Table dot, it needs to import that one from the data access layer. And then let's just return all customers like this. Now, when you're used to using a reasonable architecture, like the clean architecture or interfaces, there should be a lot of red lights flashing right here for us. We have a very tight coupling to this customer table right now. I wouldn't be able to change that unless I wanted to rewrite both my service and my data access layer. So that's a problem we'll fix later. Because we have a tight connection between these two, it's hard to change it. That is actually because, first of all, this guy is static. So it's extremely hard for me to change if I wanted to change the table later on. I don't have an interface explaining the basic information, the contract for this table. And I use a lot of static keywords, which again makes it very tightly coupled directly. So actually, not only do I reference the class, I actually reference a property inside the class to make it even tightly coupled. So this is hideous when we think architecture, but it's extremely fast when we're talking about development, right? So you might have some bosses out there saying, I don't care, get it done. And then you'll do stuff like this. And at some point he says, change it. And you'll say, well, I can't because everything is bound together. And then he'll say, you're fired. And then you'll say, I don't care, I want coffee. Okay, so now we have the customer service. And again, since I'm not using the constructor right now, let's just get rid of it. And the final step is we're going to try and see if we can actually get some customers from our customer service. So I'll jump to the console app. And yes, to those of you who really understand this now, I need to add a reference for the business logic layer again. And again, if you remember the tree-layered architecture, you'll see now that I have the reference console app, business logic layer, models, right? And from the business logic layer, I have the reference to the data access layer and the models. And from the data access layer, I have the reference to the models. So a perfect tree-layered architecture right here. So instead of listing all customers like this, what do I want to do? Well, I actually want to list the actual customers now. So let's try, first of all, if this is the case, I should probably make a function to make it easier to read called list customers. Let's try and create that function. Again, I'm printing Alt-Enter right here, and it should auto-generate that method for me. There we go. Private method, list customers. So the next step is I should be able to now get a service up and running. So let's just create a service. And what service do I want to use to list all customers? I want to use the new customer service I just built. Again, I just have to point this out. I don't have ReSharper installed right here, so I'm not getting any help with the customer service. If you had ReSharper or used Writer, it would actually know, since I'm using a package called Business Logic Layer that contains a customer service, it would auto-complete it for you right away. Not only that, it would actually also create the using keyword for you in the top to use that service. Well, let's just create this. And now I can Alt-Enter again to get that menu in here with the using keyword. So now I have a service available. With the service, I should be able to get all my customers by saying service, service, can you help me out? Yeah, dot get customers. So now I should have a list of customers right here available. And then the final step should be making a for loop or for each loop and say, I'm going to get a customer in a collection of customers. Now, again, you should now kind of get what this is all about, the for loop, but I'm pretty much just saying in the list of customers, go and grab each customer. And then it'll do a loop, and every time it's in one cycle, it'll get the next customer in the list, next customer in the list, next customer in the list. And I can now use this customer to do a console write line. And then make this crazy string notation that you're now completely used to. Whoops, like this. And then I can actually start writing, let's say, what do we have in customers? I think we have stuff like first name. Let's try and check out the customers. First name, last name, and address. Let's skip the address for now and just take first name and last name. So first name, I can also do it like this. Hi, and then put in the first name. Again, curly brackets in here indicates that I want to use a model object in here. So I'll say first name. I'll do a space. I'll give some space here as well so you guys can read my code. Here we go. I'll do another set of curly brackets. I'll do customer last name. There we go. If I run this now, I'm not going to get any customers. And maybe you know why. It's because I didn't add any customers yet. So I'll go into my database area because I want to just add some initial customers whenever the program starts. Go into my customer table. And here I'm actually going to have an init operation available. And again, to keep everything static like a boss, I'm not even sure I can do this. I'm going to break everything probably, but I'm going to make an init data right here, which is a void. And it's just going to add a couple of customers into my list right here. If you guys are happier with singletons, you can definitely also use a singleton pattern right here. I really don't care because this is not something that we're going to spend too much time on. We're going to start using a real architecture instead and skipping all the static stuff. I'll make a new customer. And again, remember, you can actually add curly brackets in the end, and then you can fill in data right away for that customer. So let's just add the first customer right here. And let's put in first name. Oops. And let's just put in John. And last name, Joe, Doe. There we go. Oh, uppercase, so he'll be angry. And I'll also give him the ID of 1. And I'll do it like this, where I say ID plus plus. Whoops. Now, what ID am I referencing? I'm referencing the ID right here. And this is actually just to give you guys the example, like we talked about one of the earlier lessons. We discussed, is it important if the plus plus is here or if it's after? Well, right now it should actually take the ID first. So that means it puts 1 in here and then add 1 afterwards. So it says 2 in here when it's done. Okay, so it gets the ID of 1, but the ID for the next guy will be 2. And then, of course, in my service, I just want to kind of, in my constructor, I'm going to get an issue right here. I can see that now. I'm going to do something else. Hey. Again, completely coupling here is perfect. So I'll do a customer table .init data right here. There we go. Because then when I create the customer service the first time, I can actually init the data in my UI. So I'll go to my UI and I'll just initialize the data right here in the constructor. I'll say customer service equals, I'm actually going to go even further. I'm going to make a local customer service up here so I can reuse it. Then I can reuse it all over my code. I'll say service equals new customer service. And then I'll call the init data on the service. And here's something you guys should probably also see some flashy red lights right here. Right now, I am initializing data, and that might mean that when I put this to production, I also initialize some data, and that might be bad. So again, we'll handle that later on with some pretty cool features. I'll get rid of this customer junk right here, because that's not useful anymore. That was before I made the change. And now I should actually be able to list customers. Let's try and see if it worked. Maybe zoom out just a little bit. I'll press 1. There's John Doe. Now, what's interesting is I made this a static setup, right? So what's kind of interesting now is if I do list that again, and this is a test you should do. If I list it again, it should still only show 1 John Doe. If it starts showing John Doe again twice now, and next time you run it 3 times, and next time 4 times, that means that either you're not initializing data correctly, or you end up actually having some kind of new service that recreates the data once more. But with a static database, it'll keep the data, so it'll just keep adding to that database. And that's a bad thing. And the next step, and again, notice, instead of actually starting to write the code in the case, I'm making another method right here called create customer. And it's going to just be a method. It's not going to do anything or return or, have any input or anything. It's just going to be its own small method in the printer. And I'm going to autocomplete that, Alt Enter, and I'm going to go to it. And now what do I need? Well, create customer it needs to have a few questions, right? I need to know what should be the first name, the last name, and actually also an address. But to be honest, I'm going to skip that now. You can play around with that yourself. So first of all, I need to ask the customer, the person creating a customer, I need to first ask him, so we need a first name. So let's say console, write line. I'll do something like type first name of new customer. Yes, I'm not the best UI guy. I'm a pretty angry old man, so I'll just keep it like this. And I'll say first name, that's what we're going to get. And I'll do a console write line. I said write, I meant read. There we go. So now I should have the first name. I'll do the same with the last name. And yes, I don't know if we need to have last name and first name in one. Should it be like that? I don't know. I don't care. You can sue me after. So now we have a first name and a last name. And of course, we should also have an address. What's next? Well, I need, again, access to my service. So again, here I will create a service. But don't worry, we'll look into making these services a lot simpler to use instead of having to recreate services all the time. But for now, let's just recreate the service. I will create a new customer. And I have two choices now. I can let my service take care of that. And that's actually what I'm going to do this time. So I'll say service, create customer. This is a new function I'm going to build. And here, again, I have to decide, do I want to pass in a customer object that I create? Or do I want to just pass in the values that I need for a customer object? And it's really up to you. Today, I'm just going to pass in first name and last name like this. And that should actually create a customer with the service. What do I want to return? I want to return the customer I just created. And again, this is also something you can choose as a developer. Do you want to return the customer you created? Or do you just want to return a Boolean value saying I created a customer? That's really up to you how you want to handle it. And the final thing I want to do is when I create this new customer, I want to just validate that his ID was okay. So I'll do a write line that says, you created a new customer with ID. And then notice I'm using this syntax again to kind of get that new ID in here. Customer just created dot ID. Now, putting in long names like that is a lot more explanatory, but you'll also notice it takes up a bit more room in my code. So it depends on how you want to do it. But now the customer should have been created. At least I hope that's the truth. If you have numbers in your creation, or you have enums, or you have dates, you might have to validate them. But since I only have strings right here, I'm not doing any validation at all. If you wanted to kind of validate that the customer was created, instead of just writing this if he's not created, I could do a null check right here. I could say if customer just created not equals null, then print this part. Else I can print something went horribly wrong. And you can also specify this a lot better. You can start doing different exceptions depending on what went wrong, and you can explain that to the user. But this is not going to be the perfect program yet. And that's why I'm just going to print this out. Now you'll notice I still have a red squiggly line right here because there's no method in the service called create customer. So I have to create that method in my service now. Let's just create that. Again, Alt Enter and generate method. I'll go to the method and here it is. Now I could of course just, first of all, this guy needs to return a customer when he's done. So let's just get that in there. I could of course just get the customer table's customer list and add the customer by doing that. But I feel that responsibility belongs to the table on how to add customers. Maybe it needs to count an ID. Maybe it needs to validate some data at the table. maybe there's some things that the table needs to do for me. So in my customer table, I'm actually going to create a method called add customer. Not create, but add customer. But I will let the service actually go and create the customer object. So I'll make a new customer right here, and I'll pass in the values that I'm getting from the outside. So I'll get first name. That'll be set to first name. That Danish word is very bad, so I'll just remove it right away. And last name will be set to last name. So again, I'm kind of giving the responsibility on how to save the data in the database, my fake list right here, to the table, but I'm actually giving the responsibility of creating the actual object. That responsibility I'm giving to the service. And again, of course, if I wanted to, I can make this into a couple of more lines and make it more readable maybe, and just add the customer down here instead like this. That's one thing. Another thing you should note is that I could, of course, like we did in the unit testing, I could make sure that first name is actually multiple letters. I could make sure it's not null. I could start doing a lot of testing right here before I actually change this. And again, we'll get back to that later. When this customer is created, I actually wanted to return a customer as well. The reason I want to do that is right now the customer doesn't have an ID. But when he's saved in the database, he should have a unique identifier after he's been saved. So after this guy has been saved, he should actually have an ID available. And the final thing I want to do is I just want to return that customer as the final step. So now I've kind of, again, this is the responsibility of the service. The service has the responsibility of validating my data. He has the responsibility of creating my objects in this setup. And he also has the responsibility of calling the table and adding the customer. Let's try and create this method in the table now. Boom. Go down to the add customer. Now all he should do is step one, he should of course set an ID for the customer. And that's going to be equal to the local ID plus plus. So I'm pretty much just, this is the table's responsibility to give a unique identifier for this customer. Now when he's set that name, he should be able to now just pretty much add the customer to the table. And then in the end, return the customer that we just created. Sweet. By the way, I could actually remove a lot of the static information right here. I'm not going to do that right now, but I could actually remove most methods that are static because my list is static. So it shouldn't be a problem. And also the ID is static. But let's just keep it for now. It's not really that important for this lesson. So now I should actually be able to create a new user. And again, notice how I kind of split it up into multiple steps. And this is what I want you guys to consider. I don't care if we're building web apps. I don't care if we're building console apps. If you're building Java, if you're building C#, try to consider a feature and building it from the UI all the way to the database. One single feature. And this single feature was creating a customer. And I tried again to start out by, I had a UI. The UI kind of hit this point right here. And then it kind of called this method right here that took care of asking some extra questions for me. Then what it did was called the service. And the service takes care of kind of handling the business logic of my setup, which could be validating the data is okay. It could be adding extra information, calculating stuff, whatever I need to do. And then it sends it and says, now you can persist the data in the database. When it's done, it returns that customer. And then the next step was taking care of the same feature inside the database. That could be an SQL query. That could be, in this case, just adding it to a DOM in-memory list. But it's really up to you how you want to handle it. And now the entire cycle is complete, right? Now I have a way to create a customer, not only in the UI, but all the way down to the database. And hopefully I can also now read it back using the read all that I have available in my service. So let's try and see if this actually runs because I might have forgotten something. And Boof. And I created a customer. I'll press enter to continue, and now he should be there. And there's last Boof. Press enter to continue. Let's add another one. Snurf, Mac, or Burf. Yeah, he should be created. And let's again try and list all. There we have the 3 of them. And again, the point is that it's not extremely easy, but it's a lot easier if you guys try to break down your features and break down who should take care of what.